Thank you guys again all for sticking this through with us. So this is about bridging geographic gaps. So once we understand what our MO is locally, we also have to deal with everybody else in the world. And I do this quite often in my consulting work. I work with a lot of global brands who are moving from one location to another or doing brand extensions across borders. So this came out of because you have to, you learn how to, and then you present about it. So what we're going to do is talk about some solutions that allow smaller agencies to answer clients' international needs. I would like to borrow that slide with the freeway interchanges from yesterday, talking about how different size companies work, because what I'm going to talk about today doesn't mean you have to be small to do it this way. It's something that I have a small agency, I work with other small agencies around the world, and it's a way in which we work. Doesn't mean if you have that huge spaghetti intersection kind of business, this isn't something that you can do as well. Basically, the crux here is to have seamless project management and execution, centering on communication and relationships. So there will be a section here at the end when we talk about tools and technologies and systems that help you coordinate these things, but what I've been learning and talking to people about is how the communication between partners across country lines and the relationships you have with them is extremely crucial, and then you can worry about the tools and technologies that you use to keep in touch with each other. There's some quotes in the presentation. None of them are mine. They are from, I did a series of interviews with some other agencies that work in this same way across different industries, across different parts of the globe. Personally, I do a lot of retail work, a lot of financial service work, and I wanted to make this presentation based in more breadth than that. So I talked to some of my partners that are based in a number of different areas about, do I have a topic? Is this something that people would be interested in? Is this something that we do uniquely? So I apologize to larger agencies in the room for this lovely quote, which is, the idea that you need a big global research firm to execute international qualitative is complete nonsense. They charge ridiculous fees and markups, and experienced independent consultant with a good global network can do better work at lower costs. Now, what I would sort of circle is like the better word. I'm not sure it's better word, but I know that some smaller agencies sort of back away in fear about doing something on a larger scale. And the fact is that if you're working with agile being the word of the day, and an inventive methodology with strong partnerships, you can do that. So inventive is an interesting thing here. Inventive also means flexible. Those of us who have small businesses have to be flexible, adaptable all the time, every day anyway. So why would that stop when we're talking about these types of projects? It's the partnership and the agility and the flexibility all really go together. When you're working with companies globally, there are a lot of people that can do a very good job. They can execute, they can work with you on projects, but there's another sort of X factor, to borrow the terminology from the presentation, in finding an alliance that's sympathetic with the way that you work. So a client comes to you, they want a certain experience, and you don't just have to deliver the knowledge and the insights and the results from the project, you have to deliver, in a way, that experience on a grander scale. So I do a lot of interviewing of potential partners around the world if I'm working with them. And it's not a, prove to me that you can do some interviews, or prove to me you can talk to people about banking. But how do you work? How do you approach your client interactions? What kind of collaborative efforts do you do? How do you work with partners in other regions? What are you open to doing? And I'd like to say that just came out of my innate, knowledge of having to do that, but no, it came out of some projects where there weren't some expectations set. And I work in a very collaborative way with my clients, and there's a lot of conversation back and forth, and it's not a show up and moderate gig. And you do have to make sure that other people representing you in other places are similarly attuned. Let's go to the themes. So everybody told me, those companies that I interviewed, everybody had a story of when this went really well. Across the board, I cannot tell you how many people said local expert partnerships not vendors. Don't use the word vendors, don't treat anybody like vendors. We're all vendors, right? But to create a partnership and what that means. The minute you call someone a partner, there's a certain degree of respect inherent in that word and a certain collaborative conversation that happens if someone is truly your partner. So there was sort of two parts to that theme. Form the partnerships and then treat them as you would your partner in this business endeavor. Engage in cultural exchanges, education, and appreciation. This is, I think in certain industries, you're more prone to put this as a priority. I talk to a lot of customers who, they're gonna go to the stores and walk up and down the aisles and, jump on the bus and talk to people and really immerse themselves in the culture of where they are. If you're doing a consumer good product and you need to see how it's being used in the world, the spin to the clients about why you have to do that and why that's important can be a bit easier than, I don't know, banking. No one really wants to do a big explorative, let's go visit people to get that nuance. But I think it's important that you make it an element in no matter what you do. No matter what you do, no matter what the subject is, you're there for a reason. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. You'd be doing it remote, or you'd get participants to do something online or on their mobile devices. But if you're there, experiencing it is a big part. And then develop project management strategies, which I'll talk a little bit about more specifically later. And this is supported by those call-in meeting platforms, document sharing solutions, all that fun stuff becomes much more important when you've got 6 or more hours time difference between you and the rest of the team. I think just to go to, I actually love these as well. Check your ego at the door. You don't know the best way of doing everything. Research in Brazil should be different. That's why you're there, isn't it? Which I don't think is talked enough about. Okay, we have this study, we have 5 markets, let's go do this. Is not part of the learning how you might have to do that slightly differently in the countries that you're going into, but I think we all forget. It's much easier to execute a project times 5, right? Rather than taking the time up front and figuring out how you need to localize that, what you need to do to get the same quality and depth of insights, no matter where you are. I think it's a very, very important thing to remember. And it's as much of a cultural tour as a research project. I think that can vary a little bit depending on how familiar people are with their market. If this is somewhere that they've researched 5 or 6 times, maybe they think they know a little bit better. But I think to keep that part of it, to not try to start rationalizing behavior seeing based on the markets you know better, or Xing out, I very carefully book things like meals and transportation when the client team is somewhere to get them to experience that culture kind of whenever possible. Like, oh, oops, is this a culturally relevant experience? Fantastic. And I think the partnership part that I was speaking to before, if you didn't notice, there was a little black bar above my presentation that says interactive. So you're here, you're awake, no one's going to the airport here yet in the room. So what qualities, I just wanted to take a couple and you can just shout them out, make something a partnership and not a vendor relationship? Does anyone have like a way that they think about this that takes it more into the partnership realm than the vendor?
Mutual accountability.
Mutual accountability on both parties' sake.
I mean, I think a mutual sense of dependency.
A mutual sense of dependency.
To successfully completing the project.
Oh, it's getting on a slide in the next version, I think. I like that one. Okay, anybody? Yeah. Rapport? Is it okay if I say it back like that? Okay, okay, rapport between everyone involved. Okay. Is this, yes? Reliability, if there's a timeline, everybody's going to say yes to that, yes? Listening.
Listening to each other.
I think that's a big one, the listening to each other too, right? Not, I want to form a partnership with you so that you do what I want you to do really well. I mean, that's a version of it, right? But actually listening to, the slide before, let's talk about how things happen in Brazil. Like, what do we need to do? You're the expert there. That's why I've picked you. That's why I'm forming this partnership. You got to kind of walk the walk once you've decided to have that kind of relationship.
I think also what I think is very important for people in, I'm based in the Netherlands, but people from the US and people from the UK or maybe also Australia Anglo-Saxon, English-speaking countries.
Yes.
In the way they communicate to non-English speaking countries can be sometimes very overwhelming, even for us as Dutch speakers. So I think that sort of cultural sensitivity should also be taken into account from people giving us work.
Yeah, I have to say, it was funny. I was talking to some colleagues in Canada about this, and they said, sometimes we forget you're American, which I took as a very big compliment, actually. Because there is a certain dominant, like, here we are, we're going to come in and we're going to, don't we all speak English? All right, fine, let's let's go. Yeah, and I think wherever you are, and I try to equate this sometimes to going to a different state within the US. Like, I don't necessarily presume everything in New York is the same as in California. I would not be good at my job if I didn't. You know what I mean? And so why would that not exist even on a bigger scale when you go further? Yeah, that's a really good point. And this, so when you get to, there we go, to trust them with their culture. So this translation of an approach can be, I mean, this is a loss of control. You found people, you like the way they work, everybody's agreed to the timeline and are listening to each other, but then there's a degree of trust. It's your project. You've won this client. You have to make them happy. Now suddenly you're listening to this person, right? That you're trying to trust them, and your clutch on the control is sort of doing a little bit of this. I've talked to a number of different agencies that actually source their local partners based on something other than a research skill. So a colleague of mine was doing some research in an Asian market and talked to a lot of the moderators and wasn't feeling that kind of rapport with the technique that they do, which is very specific. And so they went and they hired some journalists who had some days off and know how to ask people questions, and they collaborated with them in that same way. They still went out and talked to people. But I think translating that approach, your approach may not be everyone's approach. And to get the study done, for the health of the study, you have to kind of be able to be thinking on your feet like that and employ flexible tactics like that to be able to make sure that your approach is actually being conducted in the way that you want it to be. And of course, that means looping them in early on methodology design, guide development. It might be a pain in the butt, but it can really pay off, which is kind of honest, right? Like more cooks in the kitchen, a little bigger lead time, people need to look at things. Worth it every time I've done it, I have to say. Like the earlier, the better. And I think when you mentioned listening, I've kind of put that in the communication bucket. We've talked about this a little bit already, and I think that most of what we've said so far can be when you're in a partnership with anyone. But there's a certain degree of communication that needs to happen if you're working across time zones, country codes, languages. It has to be more precise, more open, more scheduled time so that less things can slip through the gap. I'm actually going to hold this slide and talk about it a little bit more when I have a list of tips up here. But one sign that you are not doing this well is if you start conference calls at 3 o'clock their time. Now these little slips, this is so easy to have happen. Happens all the time. Oops, I'm sorry, like what time zone was that in? Or did you have a national holiday? I'm so sorry, I mean, it happens. You have to be aware of so many things. God forbid you've got several markets going at once. Someone has a railroad strike and someone else is, like you have to keep all of this going in your head. So I think my prevention methods are involve everyone early, which I talked about a little bit. Set international clocks. This is however you want to do it, right? I've got it on my desktop, I've got it on my phone, everybody. I actually have started having the project team refer to wherever the client's time zone is as the time. So I will say good morning, and it's not my morning at all, right? To kind of orient yourself in the time, or the other option there is to set your time on where you're going to be so that everybody's prepped. That we start thinking about the fact that the consumers that we're going to talk to, they're getting off of work right now. Like you're not meeting them for another couple days, but just think about that, just sort of get grounded in where they are. Track the weather. This is not just for flight delays. We're very lucky here. We're very lucky in this country. People get on a conference call with me and they say, how's the drought? California's having a drought. People know that. It's embarrassing for me if I cannot say something in return that is relevant about their region or area or what's going on. This has been particularly important for me this year, having a lot of clients in Europe. It's been sort of, a depressing exercise in being able to prepare for the call, but you do need to be aware. Oh, good morning. I mean, not respectful if something has just happened somewhere in their part of their world. It's, hi, I think you said, does this time still work for you? And that doesn't have to be huge attack news, right? It's little things. It's an election that's coming up. It's a hurricane. It's whatever it is. And so I have myself, my project manager, anyone else involved in the process, use whatever streaming service, pull up a Twitter feed or wherever you're doing to track what's going on where your clients are, not only where you're going to do the research. Because sometimes, those are different, right? You're working with a client in one place, you're going to do research in another. You need to keep all of that going on in your head so that you stay relevant and in the projects wherever it is. That's kind of looped into follow their news. The set daily meeting things, I actually stole this technique from a colleague of mine, and he said, just look at all of the time zones and all of the people involved in this project. There's an hour. There's an hour somewhere that is least inconvenient for everybody, right? There's some hour where somebody has to stay a little late, somebody has to come in a little early, someone puts the kids to bed and then gets on the call, right? But you can find a time, and I just set it. Just set the time. That's the time of the call. We may not need to meet today. That's okay, we'll cancel the call. But it's helped so much in having a time to be able to have everybody present to hear something, rather than an email you send and then maybe 12 to 20 hours later somebody responds. It's been extremely helpful. It's also why I tend to not work with many other people in California. Somebody has to be up before me. So I think those kinds of things where you say we've allotted a time. We all acknowledge. I do this with my UK clients all the time. Like, all right, I know you have to stay a little bit late. Can I just tell you what time it is for me in the morning? Okay, good, we're all compromising. We're all okay. And plan time to engage in their culture. Talked about this a little bit before. I also mean you as a researcher. Your client's culture, where they're coming from, the end goal market culture, just make sure you're well versed, right, in what's going on and how to speak about things. Of course you're going to be surprised. That's the whole beauty of what we do. You get to be surprised by people and learn things. But the preparation is really, really key. And then my favorite, get friendly with your bank. I know exchange rates far better than I should at any given moment of the day. This is another person that I interviewed said, is that in your presentation about the finances of this whole thing? I was like, I'm not sure I want to get into all of that. It's like, no, I think that, he said he walked into his bank manager's office and said, this is what I do. It's a little hard to explain that this is what I do. And there's all these costs and all these zones, and he worked with me. Work with me, how do I do this? When do I bill? How do I cost, etc. I think, you just have to get bitten by this once to decide to make time to do that. Then in terms of field work, I've started calling the kickoff call the co-briefing session. I've actually started to do it projects regardless of where they take place, because everybody's briefing everybody, right? The client's saying what they need, you're saying this is kind of the approach that we're taking, just sort of briefing everybody who doesn't know about that. And if it's and if it feels collaborative, then people are listening to each other a little bit more. And then give the flexibility to adjust. This is where I think as researchers, as the lead research partner on the project, you become the hub of information, and you also become the buffer. Clients want to do things, change things, keep things the same no matter what. You're standing between them and a team of people that you're asking to be flexible and communicative with you. And I mean, a lot of times that buffer role is really strong. That is like, okay, where is this coming from and what do you need to do? Okay, how unfeasible is that, or what do we need to do to make that happen for you? That's why those daily meetings happen, right? Because you have to be an advocate for the research process, but you also need to make sure the client's satisfied. And when you're dealing with partners all over the place, somebody needs to play that role. So yes, you're doing research, but you're also doing lots of buffering and hubbing. Plan times for an immersion. You cannot be too prepared. This is especially back to the ethnographies and in-homes that are not happening on our mobile devices, where you need things like power cords and backup batteries and chargers and bottled water and all of that stuff. I have a client who has this great little kit that she takes with her no matter where she goes, right? And it's got like an emergency vitamin C packet, a tea bag, just the things that like make you prepared too. Because if you don't know where you're going to be and what time it is, you have to be present to get that insight, and you need to figure out your own preparatory tools to allow you to be there in that space. You get off a red eye and you need something to kind of put you right into, I'm in research mode, I need to be on top of my game, I need to make sure everybody's happy in this situation. That's some self-preparation as well. Also encourage a co-do briefing session. I used encourage rather than set up here because I'd love to say every project is tied with a beautiful bow of co-listening, but sometimes you just write the report and get it out there. But I think it's really helpful, especially if you want to talk about going into that market. The next time a client calls you to do that kind of project in that sort of space, better know what worked and what didn't work. So even if that's not a whole group decision, I think it's key to be able to do. Okay, this is another one of my favorites. There is no better way to screw up an international research project than by getting cheap with translation of stimuli. Hire a professional translator who understands marketing and market research. Don't get suckered into using a tour guide or somebody who works in foreign relations or Jenny, the assistant account exec at the agency who majored in French at Bryn Mawr. I don't know if that was an actual example, but it's really good. Because the skimping, the word skimp, you just can't do it. You can't do it. You've got, input equals output, right? And I have been tempted, like, how much is that to transcribe and translation? Like, good God, wish I was in that business, right? But it's so crucial. And then I have a colleague who says yes, and then bring it back and translate it again, right? Have it translated, bring it back, translate it back into the client's language. Does it still ring true? Okay. Check in along the way, especially with concepts. Really key. So through all of this, it is about flexibility. It's about respecting the partnership that you set up. Great if you set up a partnership, respect it. Offer best practices and solutions. I do think this all sounds very flexible and everybody's listening to everybody, but I do think if you were being hired to conduct the project, you definitely need to come in with a stake in the ground. This is how I would advise doing this. This is the parameters based on the RFP. This is how, and then be prepared to be flexible. But I don't think you can just come in and be sort of wishy-washy, making everybody happy, right? You do need to come from a grounded place of advice while listening to find the solution that works for everyone involved. So I want to talk about a few of the logistic tools, and I think I've left enough time. I kind of want to hear what people are using, what works for you. These are some of the ones that I use, and this kind of comes back to the stake in the ground thing. I don't want to come into a project and say, hey, I want to communicate however you're used to communicating. I'd rather say, look, we need a call platform, we need a sharing, so we need some sort of cloud-based something, right? And outline the recommended tools. Then if they say, I'm sorry, my corporate firewall, despises Dropbox, that's not possible. Fine, that's fine, but we need something like that. What's going to work for you? So I think it's proposing the tools and then making sure things work and checking that they work. So because I'm going to ask you guys to share, I'm going to share my embarrassing story on this one. I have a lovely international call plan. I did a lot of research to make sure I was picking the best one. And I send out the dial-out number. I have this little country code sheet, right? Find your country on this list and call into this call. Really big client. I had spent a long time winning this client. Really excited to kick off the first project. And I get this email. Oh, there's no dial-in for Luxembourg. Oh, maybe I should have checked that the client's country code was on my country code list before I said, it happens to the best of us, right? So I've switched call providers. Does anyone have something that's not on this sheet that they use to facilitate these kinds of conversations, sharing, organization? Yeah.
It's a website called timeanddate.com.
Timeanddate.com.
Yeah, you can put in different locations for time zones, and it tells you what the best times are to actually be.
Very cool, very cool. So you can take something away from this that's not just from me. Anybody else? Yes?
Think tank.
Think tank. And that you use that for?
Group decision support, innovation workshops.
Very cool. Anybody else? Any horror stories or great stories with any of these? You want to weigh in? No, I think it's about choosing what's right for you, right? It's what works well for you. It's what you have set up internally. And then it's making sure that that's going to work for your partners involved. Because back to the listening and partnership, you can't enforce something on somebody, right? Well, this is the way we communicate. If it's not going to facilitate the discussion, it's not going to help.